They raised their glasses for Vanessa, but when my name hung in the air, silence fell heavier than the crystal chandeliers. The November air carried the scent of wood smoke through the Cole estate, a Virginia mansion whose polished floors and gilded mirrors pretended to hold harmony. Warmth from the fireplaces glossed the room, but beneath it I could feel the draft of judgment curling along the edges. Crystal clinked laughter rose, and yet I sat half-hidden at the long mahogany table, the invisible daughter. Father's voice carried with the strength of command, praising Vanessa for her bold vision in New York, her leadership, her unstoppable talent. Guests responded like trained instruments, applause at the right moment, smiles stretching wide heads, nodding as if to a conductor's baton. I remembered his old maxim, success speaks for itself, and felt how silence had been sharpened into a weapon. Tonight it cut at me in front of chandeliers whose fractured lights glittered like watchful eyes. Vanessa basked, her emerald gown catching fire from every angle, every crystal drop crowning her in brilliance. She didn't need to command the room bent to her. My mother leaned close, pearls swaying as she added her praise, and father's hand rested proudly on Vanessa's shoulder. My brother Andrew, seated across from me, gave a small, almost apologetic glance before turning his face back toward the glow. Then Vanessa pivoted. And of course, Madison. She began, her smile too wide, her tone honeyed enough to fool anyone who hadn't heard it for 30 years. Our dear civil servant? The government could always use someone dependable to file the paperwork, I suppose. Laughter scattered like thrown glass, sharp and echoing. My cheeks burned, but I kept still. Forks clinked, champagne shimmered, and the air itself seemed to lean away from me as though to join their side. I chose not to rise. I chose not to defend. Instead, I memorized every smirk, every indulgent chuckle. The chandelier's fractured light reminded me cracks always appear where perfection is claimed. Vanessa lifted her glass again, striking harder with a toast meant to sting to Madison, who shows us that loyalty is its own reward, even if it never leads anywhere grand. The room erupted, complicit in her cruelty. I lifted my glass in silence, letting the applause thunder around me, my throat tight, but my mind sharper than it had ever been. I whispered to myself, unheard by anyone, "One day, this silence will be my victory." By December, Vanessa wasn't satisfied with silencing me at home. She needed the world to believe I was nothing. New York's wind cut like glass, and the Cole Foundation lobby gleamed in sterile perfection, marble floors, screens looping victories, handlers in earpieces moving with rehearsed polish. This wasn't a family dining room anymore. It was a theater designed to erase me. Vanessa stood flawless beneath the lights, navy suit, pressed lashes catching the flash. "Our mission is clarity," she began, and behind her, a screen came alive. The video played launch events, ribbon-cutting speeches. I knew every detail because I had lived them, the midnight reroutes, the spreadsheets that saved clinics weeks of delay. Yet on the screen, I was no more than a blurred shoulder. My words were spoken in her voice. Credits rolled beneath her name. Applause filled the auditorium, a verdict without trial. I sat in silence, my absence turned into proof that I was unnecessary. Later in the boardroom, she sat at the head of the table, calm and lethal. Before the vote, she said, "We must address alignment." Eyes turned to me as though waiting for cracks to appear. A director murmured about confusion in operations. Vanessa folded her hands. "Madison is devoted, but leadership requires fluency she hasn't shown. She's better with simple tasks." I forced calm. The March rollout succeeded because I authorized the reroutes. The audit trail confirms it. Her fingers brushed the tablet and the wall lit with another edit, my work explained in her voice, her name, below the chart. "We all carried it," she said softly, "but I bore the risk. That's leadership." Laughter followed when she delivered the line, "Madison means well, but this foundation needs leaders, not paper pushers." It spread like smoke, choking my defense before it left my lips. The chair moved on numbers, replacing truth. When the meeting adjourned, Andrew found me in the hall, eyes lowered. She told me you were overwhelmed. I didn't think you didn't want to, I answered. He flinched, and I regretted the sharpness, though, not the truth. In the elevator, the promotional video looped again, silent this time. Without music, its seams showed a clock and a wristwatch, disagreeing shadows reversing sides between cuts, a date on the wall out of sequence. Edits stitched too tightly, evidence of a story manufactured, not lived. For a moment, anger steadied into clarity. Lies rarely survive scrutiny. I stepped into the cold lobby, cameras flashing behind the glass. Outside, sleet fell like static. Vanessa's face towered on a billboard ribbon mid-cut, my cropped hand invisible beside her. My phone buzzed with unread messages, but I ignored them, keeping only the details in mind: the timestamp, the reflection, the watch. Threads waiting to be pulled. Andrew texted, "I'm here if you need to talk." I stared at the words until they blurred. Intentions could be edited too. Pulling up my collar, I walked into the storm. The city's indifference was sharp, but under it a pulse of determination grew. If she needed to erase me frame by frame, then my presence had mattered more than she dared admit. As I walk out, cheeks burning, I mutter, if she needed to cut me out of the video, it means I had something worth hiding. Failure burned, but in the ashes of my humiliation, I found the first spark of strategy. I carried December's laughter like shrapnel into spring, but pain, kept still and studied, becomes a compass. The doctored video haunted me, yet also whispered if she needed to erase me, she feared me. So I learned the building's shadows and the rhythm of doors where secrets paused between badges. Washington felt colder than New York. Marble cooled tempers but preserved echoes. I stayed late in corridors that smelled of toner and old coffee, paging through archives we mirrored during joint projects with the foundation. Uncut files lived where convenience said they wouldn't. I found them anyway. In the raw footage, clocks argued with each other. A wall calendar promised April during a speech dated March. A wristwatch read 09:17, while a lobby clock insisted on 08:42. Shadows reversed between takes, although no lamp moved. A chrome podium caught a half reflection of my sleeve, and the clicker in my hand, then a jump cut performed a vanishing act. The truth was there, faint but intact, like watermark text under glossy ink. I wrote every inconsistency down line by line and felt shame harden into method. The city's late cafes became my map. I learned which tables hid conversations, which baristas ignored names. A former auditor, careful with her consonants, sipped lukewarm tea and spoke of transfers that changed lanes at midnight. A junior accountant with a conscience and a quiet fear of rent showed me a ledger entry labeled with an acronym that did not exist in the chart of accounts. Delaware Shell's Luxembourg mail drops a surname she used in college, turning up as a registered agent. Smoke resolved into a shape. Andrew met me after work near Union Station, the evening trains wheezing like old promises. His tie was loosened, his certainty too. "Vanessa says you're spiraling," he told the menu. I slid a printed receipt across the table, a charity disbursement routed to an entity that mirrored our program's name by one transposed letter. He read it once, then again, knuckles whitening around the paper. "It could be an error," he tried. "Errors don't open bank accounts," I said. He didn't answer. Silence for once did not acquit her. I needed a witness who spoke a language Vanessa couldn't edit. So I called a man whose life had once depended on a decision I'd made when the manual offered no guidance. We met in a bar that smelled of wood and unasked questions. He wore the quiet of men who have seen chaos and learned to fold it. "If money is slipping between programs," he said, "the root may touch contracts that run deeper than charity and people who dislike daylight." National stakes tasted like metal on my tongue. I nodded anyway. I was already committed. Humiliation had signed the orders. The foundation's spring cocktail party dressed itself in neutral music and soft glass. Donors circled Vanessa as if heat alone proved light. I moved along the perimeter, a tide no one measured. Small talk collected around me and rolled off. When the CFO mentioned Zurich in a tone meant only for investors, I let my gaze drift and said almost lazily, "Strange how the Zurich account doubled overnight. Almost like someone fed it something richer than donations." The sentence hung over the punch bowl and did not evaporate. For the first time, she flinched. Not a collapse, just a hairline crack, pupils tightening, breath catching, a smile recalibrating by millimeters. I saw it because I had trained to see small movements before they became large mistakes. She recovered as the room supplied laughter on credit fingers brushing a lapel that did not need smoothing. My pulse slowed. Slowly. The proof I needed did not live in applause. It lived in that blink. She drifted closer through perfume and camera light. Her earrings chimed like rehearsed mercy. As Vanessa regains composure, she whispers in my ear, "If you come for me, Madison, I'll burn you down first." The day Vanessa thought would crown her turned into the day the masks began to fall. Her threat to burn me down had echoed for months, but a threat betrays fear. I kept it tucked like a letter I would one day return unopened. By September, the moment had arrived. The Cole Foundation annual gala shimmered as if Manhattan itself bowed in admiration. Chandeliers dripping crystal velvet drapes, pulled like theater curtains, glasses of champagne, lifted by hands that believed wealth alone could polish character. I walked in with nothing but a folder and the calm that comes when humiliation is burned away and only resolve remains. Vanessa ruled the stage as if it had been built for her voice alone. She wore gold sequins that bent light toward her hair in immaculate waves, a smile rehearsed until it passed for sincerity. She spoke of record profits, visionary expansions, and partnerships that would reshape the global landscape of philanthropy. Applause swelled in crescendos timed like orchestral movements, but behind every clap I heard the hollowness of a jury clapping before deliberation. My parents sat near the front, Edward puffed with paternal pride, Margaret dabbing her eyes. Andrew lingered at the side of the dais, his suit crisp, his conscience crumpled. When she unveiled her new initiative, I stepped forward. No music announced me, no spotlight followed. Yet silence spread faster than sound. I placed a small drive into the technician's hand. The screen behind her flickered, swallowing her promotional logo and replacing it with uncut footage. Grainy at first, then sharp. The launch of the medical outreach program, unedited, unaltered. There I was, commanding the room, giving the directives Vanessa had claimed as her own. The timestamps aligned. The reflection of my hand on the podium matched the clicker she had stolen. Murmurs rippled, glasses, stilled forks froze in midair. Vanessa laughed lightly as if a joke had been played for her amusement. "Old material," she said, but the tightness around her mouth betrayed the script slipping. I held up the folder and opened it like scripture. Inside the ledgers, the wire transfers the paper trail from charity coffers to offshore shells. "This is what old material looks like," I said. The numbers glared under the chandeliers more harshly than any spotlight. Gasps broke into the air like glass shattering. Donors leaned forward, names they trusted now entangled with addresses in Luxembourg and Panama. A journalist's pen scratched furiously. The MC stuttered into his microphone before cutting it altogether. Andrew stared at the floor, then at me. His throat-worked jaw clenched, and finally words spilled that tasted of ash. I saw the discrepancies. I wanted to believe it was oversight, but I knew. I said nothing. His confession cracked the floor Vanessa stood on more deeply than any spreadsheet could. She struck back with venom, voice pitched sharp. "This is envy dressed as evidence my sister, bitter overlooked, would rather burn her family than celebrate its triumph." She reached for the audience with open hands, palms glinting under stage light, but her appeal bounced against stone faces. That was when I delivered the weight she couldn't lift. From my coat pocket, I withdrew a sealed document stamped in the insignia, "No gala could imitate the Department of Justice." The statement was brief, clinical, final. An investigation already underway. Vanessa's name inked in the margins of fraud. Her body stiffened, glittering gown suddenly a shroud. The hall fell utterly still. I let silence fill the space where defense had lived. My parents' expressions collapsed inward, Andrew's gaze fixed on me with the relief of someone finally freed to choose. At the edge of the crowd, my Navy ally gave the smallest nod, confirmation that truth carried its own gravity. As silence engulfs the gala, I look directly at Vanessa and say softly, "You built your empire on silence. Tonight, silence is your verdict." The night after her fall, the city lights looked different, not as towers of judgment, but as proof that even giants could collapse. By morning, headlines learned my sister's name in a new tense. Networks ran lower thirds, indictment filed, Cole barred from foundation leadership. Phones that once rang for Vanessa went quiet. A week later, I drove south to Virginia. The estate rose from the trees' brick-white columns. Autumn browned the lawn. Reporters idled at the gate, cameras dozing on tripods. I walked past and stepped into the garden. Here my father once toasted only Vanessa. The fountain stuttered. Leaves gathered like unsent letters. Andrew waited on the gravel path, suit wrinkled by a week of bad sleep. He let the quiet settle, then said what mattered. "I was wrong. We stood by the espaliered pair. The board will issue a statement," he said. "They're reinstating the record, your authorship, the rollout, the decision that saved the March Clinic." I nodded. Vindication arrives as paperwork. By midday, we sat with directors and counsel. Photographers were allowed for 3 minutes, enough to make the truth visible. Words I had waited months to hear entered the record. Vanessa came late. The bright had drained from her like dye from fabric. Sunglasses came off a beat too slow. An attorney hovered behind her shoulder. She looked around as if someone might hand her the old script. No one did. When the chair finished, she laughed once, brittle. "You'll regret humiliating me," she told the room, then turned the point toward me. "You think silence is mercy? It's cowardice." No one answered. The room learned how large quiet can be when it is full. I opened the velvet case I had carried since the funeral and lifted the medal my father kept hidden in a drawer. Metal caught afternoon light and gave it back without exaggeration. I didn't make a speech. I didn't list injuries. I held the medal high for family and board to see, then lowered it to my palm. Our history settled into its true order. Outside, shutters clicked. A donor started to announce an ethics review and found he could not improve on silence. Andrew touched my shoulder, not to guide me, only to stand where a line had been. The fountain kept stuttering. The leaves kept collecting. When reporters called my name at the threshold, I offered nothing more than the stillness I had earned. I had learned how not to fill a room, how to let it measure itself. You do not argue with a collapsed wall, you make sure no one rebuilds it crooked. Her threat to burn me down had come true, but only for herself. In the quiet that followed, I thought about the years a cropped frame can steal, about how a family can mistake applause for love. The board statement posted. The phones began to ring for the right reasons. I took one breath, then another, steady as drill cadence. As cameras click and the world watches, I whisper inwardly. My story did not end with applause. It ended with silence, and silence was enough. I stood through silence that once cut like glass, but today I ask you to see silence as my proof, not my wound. If my story reached you, let it remind you that dignity does not need applause. It thrives in patience, in resilience, in holding the line when the world doubts you. To those who watched me fall and rise again, your support tells me the fight was not only mine. And if you face betrayal or erasure in your own life, remember this. Let silence work for you, not against you, because truth in time always speaks louder.